The coronavirus crisis has dragged one issue to the center of the table: fake news. To what extent does freedom of speech protect people who publish news that is simply lies? Over the past few months, we've seen all sorts of websites, even YouTube channels, say all sorts of outrageous things about the coronavirus. And we're not just talking about conspiracy theories either. For example, many websites have recommended barbarities such as drinking bleach to cure COVID-19. This is false. Bleach doesn't cure coronavirus and it's poisonous. If anyone has considered following any of these tips, and I can't believe I have to say this, please don't do it. But so much fake news has led many governments to consider creating laws to prevent anyone from publishing misleading facts. And we're not just talking about governments. Platforms like this one that we're on now, YouTube, or similar ones like Facebook, have taken action such as this.
How is Facebook dealing with fake news through third-party fact-checkers?
Exactly. Everyone is trying to solve the problem of fake news. Even many YouTubers are actively asking that YouTube itself act forcefully against some channels that promote hoaxes. And that's when this story comes up and makes us all rethink everything we thought about the truth.
Here's how Wirecard went from analyst darling to a $2.2 billion accounting scandal. Business Insider.
And I know what you're thinking, what does a financial scandal have to do with fake news? Well, a lot, believe me. We're talking about one of the biggest financial scandals in German history. A scandal that includes fraud of more than 1.9 billion euros. Not only were German authorities unable to see it, they also called all those who sounded the first alarm conspirators and spreaders of fake news. I know what a lot of you are probably thinking, Wirecard? It's the first time I've ever heard of this company. Well, yes, it's true that Wirecard is not the most well-known brand, but I'm sure you've all used their services at some point. It is one of the largest payment processing companies in the world. If you've bought something online, you've unknowingly used Wirecard technology, especially if you've paid for something related to gambling sites or porn. Yes, this German startup had specialized in that particular niche market. And I know what a lot of you are thinking, online payments. Well, I'm sure this company is making a mint right now. If there's one sector that's benefited from the coronavirus crisis, it's got to be the online market. At a time when we've all bought things online payment companies have increased their business a lot. So Wirecard has to be making a lot of money, right? Well, nothing could be further from the truth. Check it out.
Wirecard collapses into insolvency. June 25th, 2020. Financial Times.
That's right. If Wirecard has become famous for anything in recent months, it's because it's been part of the biggest financial scandal of the year. Apparently, half of its business has been invented. And here's the juiciest part. All of this was happening while the German authorities not only turned a blind eye, but they even denounced the journalist who investigated the story. What were they accusing him of? Fake news and market manipulation. You may be surprised, but unlike the traditional press, the economic press is often much more regulated. If a financial analyst publishes false information about a company, it can sink or raise that company's valuation on the stock exchange. And so there are laws that try to avoid this. The problem? Well, sometimes these laws can end up chasing the wrong people. So this video can serve as a cautionary tale about fake news, finance, and the price of truth. Because the questions we're asking today are, what exactly is the Wirecard scandal? What did the public authorities fail to do? Why did they not see this coming? How can things like this be prevented from happening again? Today, we're going to answer these questions, but first, let's look at some history.
The Great European Hope.
Imagine that you have an e-commerce store and that you sell Hawaiian shirts online. I buy a shirt from you for 10 euros. That means that at the end of the transaction, there should be 10 euros less in my bank account and 10 euros more in yours. So far, it all makes sense. The question is, who verifies that both your bank and mine have registered that sale? Chances are your bank is different from mine, especially if we're in different countries. So registering such sales is the work of electronic payment companies. And I'm sure you already know a lot of companies in this sector. MasterCard, Visa. Well, Wirecard is a platform that allows your e-commerce site to accept most all the different payment methods in the world. If I want to pay you with Visa, MasterCard, or any other system, Wirecard makes it possible.
Customers can put various products from different stores into their shopping basket and pay with their smartphone in one single transaction. Are you ready for the future of payment?
and this company began in 1999. And like so many other internet companies that were born around that time, Wirecard nearly disappeared when the dot-com bubble burst. If the coronavirus crisis has been the boom time for internet companies, the 2000 crisis was quite the opposite. And it was at a time when Wirecard was worth less than a roll of toilet paper that the anti-hero of our story appeared, Mr. Marcus Braun. Apart from looking like the bad guy in RoboCop, Marcus Braun had a really great idea to make this company really take off: porn and gambling. You may be surprised, but these companies are usually completely isolated from the rest of the e-commerce market. For example, most payment method companies refuse to work with porn companies. However, those pages also need payment processing too. Lots of payments. So Wirecard became the only payment company that didn't discriminate against adult entertainment. Conclusion: Braun bought a dilapidated business and 5 years later was entering the German stock exchange. That's right. And what did they want to do this for? Well, they needed quick funding to be able to take the next step: international expansion. And now I want you to keep this fact in mind. At that time, the Wirecard share price was at €5. Remember this number because it's important. €5 per share. With all that liquidity provided by multiple investors, Wirecard made the big leap. In 2007, they opened an office in Singapore and hired the second anti-hero in this story, Ido Kurniawan, director of Wirecard in Asia and the Pacific. Exactly. Another gentleman who also looks like the bad guy in a B movie. And what was this man's strategy for conquering Asia? Well, very easy. Buy everything that moved. Suddenly, Wirecard went out to buy all kinds of small businesses that offered online payments in local markets. A small company in the Philippines, another company in Dubai, and so on. So that by 2014, Wirecard already offered services in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and Turkey. By now, the share price had already climbed to €30. That is, in less than 10 years, it had multiplied its value by 6. Shareholder meetings looked like birthday parties. Every year was better than the last. But make no mistake, even at that time there were signs that things were too good to be true. By then, the Financial Times had already begun to be suspicious.
Wirecard is a little-known German tech stock worth €5 billion and a puzzle. It grows at breakneck pace, but buys obscure payment companies around the world, which keep the growth going. Financial Times.
This article is from 2050, and it basically posed one big question. How is it possible that they bought ruined or failing companies in Asia, and that in just 1 year made them so profitable? No one was able to explain it for sure, and this should have prompted the financial authorities to start analyzing this company. In Germany, the authority that handles these things is called the BaFin. However, they didn't seem to be up to the job of getting inside the company to carry out inspections. Why? It was a great German miracle. Something like a European Facebook that any country would dream of having. To give you an idea, in 2016, they bought the online payment division of Citigroup. In other words, they entered the US market through the front door. They did something similar in Brazil. By then, the share price was already more than €46. And at that time, 2017, a German magazine published this article.
€250 million puzzle of the Wirecard stock market miracle. Managermagazine.de.
Basically, Wirecard said that they bought payment companies in Asia that were virtually unknown and worth very little. They took their client portfolio, restructured the company, and inside a year, they were making profits. To put it another way, in just 5 years, Wirecard was already tripling its profits. Moreover, in January 2019, Wirecard was worth more than Deutsche Bank itself. That is, its stock market value was higher than Germany's largest bank. This is when they entered the DAX 30, which is the index with the largest companies on the German stock exchange. Suddenly, they were everyone's darling. They went from being a payments method company that worked with porn pages to being the platform used by more than 100 airlines and supermarket chains like Aldi. By then, the stock price was way up at €190. Of course, this is nothing compared to Amazon or Facebook, but it's still a good result. In 15 years, the stock had gone from €5 to €190. It's not bad at all, is it? Well, all of a sudden, just when everyone was gushing over Wirecard, the stock price started to fall for the first time. And you're probably wondering, but why? Well, look at this.
The stock market mavericks.
What if I told you that you could make money when a stock price falls? That is, technically you can buy shares of companies that you think are going to get worse. This technique is called short selling. I'll tell you how it works. Imagine that you have Wirecard shares in December 2018. Its market price at that time is 190 euros. At that moment, I say, hey, lend me your action and I'll give it back to you in a year with interest. You say, okay, great. I didn't plan on selling it, so knock yourself out. When you give me the action, I sell it, and I put that $190 per share in my pocket. I hope that in a year's time, Wirecard shares are going to crash in the stock market. If my calculations are correct, in December 2019, the Wirecard stock will be, let's say, 10 euros. And at that point, I buy the stock again for 10 euros. I return it with interest, and voila! I just made 180 euros per share from a company that's doing badly. As you can imagine, this is a very risky practice. And usually, people who buy short are usually a very particular type of investor. They are known as short sellers. I mean, they're basically people who are going against the market. Think about it. In January 2019, Wirecard was going from strength to strength. The German BaFin claimed that the company had all its accounts in order. Ernst & Young, which is the company that audited its accounts, confirmed that Wirecard's business had no problems. In other words, all sources of authority said Wirecard is the future. You'd have to be crazy to buy short with a company like that, right? Well, that's kind of the way that short sellers are. A kind of unique tribe within the world of finance. Something like conspiracy theorists, but with one difference. In this case, your truth comes at a price. You're putting your money on the line because you really think something's not going as well as everyone else believes. But that's not all. Short investors usually have very bad reputation. At the end of the day, they benefit when everything goes wrong for almost everyone else. And all of that explains why, in February 2019, we found a story like this.
BaFin bans short sales of Wirecard shares after market cap battered.
Exactly. The German financial authorities wanted to protect their little Facebook. They didn't want a bunch of short-term investors sinking the company. At the end of the day, if other investors see how many people there are buying short, the stock price is likely to drop, and no one wanted their stock to fall down. At the time, those lone wolves betting against Wirecard were seen as the classic conspirators in tinfoil hats. And of course, many thought that the Financial Times was publishing a series of fake news articles. And as we said at the beginning, fake news in the world of finance is punishable.
BaFin, the German financial watchdog, has filed a criminal complaint against 2 Financial Times journalists and several short sellers, accusing them of potential market manipulation over reports about suspected accounting irregularities at Wirecard.
I know what you're all thinking. That's a bit much. The German state was fighting the only ones who were telling the truth. And yes, it's true. Now that we know how the story ends, it's easy to say it was an injustice. But what would you have thought if you had read this news in 2019? What would you have thought if you had been told that a newspaper is publishing fake news and that they are being taken to court? Would you have said it was an injustice? Or maybe you would have been happy that something was finally being done about fake news leaks. I'll leave it to you to think about. In any case, not even BaFin's efforts served to prevent Wirecard from failing. Listen up.
The scandal that rocked Germany.
October 2019. Wirecard stock price is now at 110 euros. As much as BaFin has banned short-term purchases, the Financial Times continues to publish analysis that leaves the company looking far from being in a good position. They still don't understand how it's possible to buy small businesses in Asia and achieve so much profit in such a short amount of time. And around that time, when the market was starting to turn its back on Wirecard, the company came together and made this decision.
Wirecard hires KPMG for independent audit after Financial Times allegations.
In case that headline didn't sink in, let me explain. Large companies are required to let another outside company review their accounts periodically. These companies that review the accounts of other companies are called auditors. In today's global economy, there are 4 major audit companies, which are often called the Big Four: Deloitte, PricewaterhouseCoopers, EY, formerly known as Ernst & Young, and KPMG. Until this point, EY had audited Wirecard's accounts, but since the market continued not to trust Wirecard, they said, okay, we're going to be audited externally so you can feel calmer. And probably the fact that KPMG was hired was also by design. After all, Marcus Braun, the CEO of the company that looks like the bad guy from RoboCop, had previously worked at KPMG. He probably thought his KPMG friends would be more sympathetic to him than any other auditors. However, this move could not have gone any worse. Take a look at this.
Wirecard bombs again following a devastating KPMG special audit report.
Basically, both EY and KPMG discovered that Wirecard had invented 1.9 billion euros in profits. Exactly. According to Wirecard, they were unstoppable in the Philippines. According to them, almost all Philippine residents used their systems. So successful had they been in this country that they had revenues of 1.9 billion euros. So far, everyone had believed these figures. At the end of the day, why would Wirecard lie? Who's going to go all the way to the Philippines to check if the business exists or not? Well, at this point, someone did decide to approach Wirecard's alleged offices in Manila. With such turnover, you would imagine a huge glimmering building, right? Well, none of that. The Philippines Wirecard empire was housed in a humble office shared with a bus company. But it doesn't end there. The Philippines Central Bank claimed that it barely knew Wirecard. Think about it. With such a huge business, Wirecard should have been investigated by the central bank. What's more, under Philippine law, if a company's volume exceeds 5% of the foreign currency reserves held by an entire country, they are required to undergo an inspection. 2 billion would have been more than enough to warrant a routine inspection by the authorities. However, Wirecard Philippines was a house of cards. As you can imagine, as soon as this news was discovered, Wirecard's managers began to drop like flies.
Police raid Wirecard entities in Singapore after reports of fraud allegations at payments giant. Wirecard's former CEO, Marcus Braun, arrested after $2 billion scandal explodes.
Meanwhile, Wirecard has already filed for bankruptcy, and some of its managers have gone missing. The company's attorney denies having had any contact with his client. The chief accountant is missing in the Philippines, and the whole world is starting to distrust Germany. If the financial authorities in that country failed to see this scandal, how many other companies could be up to something similar? For the time being, the names of BaFin officials who are directly involved in this scandal are only beginning to emerge. Think about it. In this case, it is simply not that the authorities were not able to detect fraud, it is that they actively worked to silence all those who raised the alarm. So now the question is over to you. How could this scandal have been avoided? Who controls the regulators? To what extent can this story prompt us to see the fake news debate in a different light? Leave your answers in the comments. So I really hope you've enjoyed this video. Please hit like if you did, and don't forget to subscribe for brand new videos. Don't forget to check out our friends at the Reconsider Media podcast. They provided the vocals in this episode that were not mine. And also, this channel is possible because of Patreon and our patrons on that platform. Please consider joining them and supporting our mission of providing independent political coverage. And as always, I'll be seeing you in the next video.
And if you want to learn more about politics and hear even more of my lovely voice, you can join us at Reconsider Media. We have a podcast at reconsidermedia.com/podcast. See you there.